Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'm back with 5 all new fall decor DIYs. Today's video is extra special because I'm teaming up with 3 of my YouTube friends for a fall video hop and playlist. I will let you guys know a little bit more about that later on in the video, but let's go ahead and jump right into today's first project. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be using 3 pieces of wood that are 19 inches by 2.5 inches. I usually buy all of my wood from either Lowe's or Home Depot. The first thing I'm doing is taking my folk art wood tint in the color walnut and I'm painting it on my pieces of wood in sections, and then once I have it all painted on, I use an old rag to wipe away the excess wood tint, and again I did that for all 3 pieces of wood. I'm also going to be using 2 smaller pieces of wood. These ones are 7.5 inches by 1.5 inches. And I'm doing the same thing, just using that wood tint in walnut. I'm painting it on and then wiping away the excess with an old rag. Next, I'm using hot glue on the sides of all 3 of my larger pieces of wood to hold them together. And then once I have them attached, I'm then going to be placing my 2 smaller pieces of wood on top. And then before I attach those down, I am going to be using this Welcome to Our Patch stencil. This is from Amazon and I will have it linked down in the description box. But I get the stencil centered where I want it to be, and then I start moving my smaller pieces of wood around, and I am using a measuring tape just to make sure that I have them spaced out exactly the same on both sides. And once I have them all spaced where I want them to be, I'm using hot glue on the bottom just to get them attached to the top pieces or the bottom pieces of wood. Then to keep my stencil from moving around, I'm using some painter's tape at the top and bottom just to keep it nice and straight. Then for my words, Welcome to Our Patch, I'm using my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. And I was going to do the entire piece in white, but then I decided to do the pumpkin a different color. So I'm just going to be using some painter's tape over top of the pumpkin so that I don't get any of the white colored paint on the pumpkin. Once I have all of the words painted, I then peel the painter's tape off of the pumpkin and then just use that same tape over the words so that I don't get the pumpkin color on my words. Then for the pumpkin color, I'm using folk art matte acrylic paint in the color Pueblo. And then once the pumpkin paint was dry, I took some more painter's tape and placed it over top of the pumpkin because I'm doing the stem of the pumpkin in a different color. And the color I'm using for that is folk art chalk paint in the color Sage Shadow. Then after all of my paint was dry, I removed all of my painter's tape and my stencil. Since this is going to be a serving tray, I'm using these 2 handles. These ones are either from Home Depot or Lowe's, I can't remember. But I'm just using my measuring tape to make sure that I have them centered on my top pieces of wood. Once I have them all centered, I'm just moving them over a little bit and placing hot glue on the bottoms to attach them. And I did the exact same thing for the other side. And this is the tray all finished. This was such an easy project and it looks so high end and it was really inexpensive to create. I do recommend using a clear sealer over top just to make sure everything stays nice and protected. Moving right along into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm using this large paper mache pumpkin. This I did pick up from Hobby Lobby this year. And I'm first going to be taking some of these dot stickers. These are from Dollar Tree. And the only ones that I could find are these pink ones. But I do think they have like a pearl color that you can buy as well. So I do recommend getting the white color if you are going to be painting your pumpkin white. For this one, I'm just going to be taking the pink stickers and placing them in all of the grooves of the pumpkin. The little strips of the dots were not long enough to go all the way down, so I did have to do several strips. As you can see, I would just cut the little bead off until there was like a little strip showing, like you can see here, and then I would continue placing it next to the other dot, and it looked really seamless and you couldn't even tell that it was more than one strip. And I just continued to do that over and over in all of the grooves of the pumpkin until I had them all covered with the dots. After I had all of the dots on, then I'm going to be going in with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I'm painting over the pink dots first because I'm going to have to do several coats of this paint over top just to get that pink color all covered up. I did do 4 coats on the dots, and then the rest of the pumpkin I only had to do 2 coats of this paint. Then once the paint was dry, I moved on to the stem, and for the stem of the pumpkin, I'm using the Folk Art Matte Acrylic Paint in the color Raw Sienna. I wanted to add a little bit more detail and dimension to my pumpkin, so I'm using my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Java, and I'm dry brushing this color over top of all of those dots that I added to all of the grooves of the pumpkin. This is just gonna really make those dots pop. So I did that, and it was kind of messy. I wanted this to look rustic and kind of old. So once I had the dots all covered up with this paint, I decided to use this same Java color and add a little bit of detail to the stem of the pumpkin to make it look a little bit more realistic. I then thought the pumpkin needed even more detail, so I took that same Java color and whatever was left over on my brush, and I just very lightly painted it on the rest of the pumpkin. And since this is a paper mache pumpkin, it did have a lot of little crevices and grooves, and once I put that Java color over top, it really made those pop, and it almost looked like the pumpkin was wood. Then I decided to add a second color. So for this one, I'm using that same Raw Sienna color that I used for the stem. I'm using a little bit less of this color than I did the Java color, and I'm just very lightly painting that again over all of the dots that I had added in the grooves, and then just a little bit on the other parts of the pumpkin. Next, I'm using some hot glue to attach Spanish moss all the way around my stem on the very top of my pumpkin. I'm also going to be using this Grateful faux leather tag from Hobby Lobby. I'm placing it around the stem of the pumpkin, and then to keep it in place, I'm using a little bit of hot glue underneath just to make sure that it doesn't move around. And then I'm also going to be using this leaf. This came from Dollar Tree from one of the fall stems. I used some hot glue to attach that right next to the Grateful tag, and then I added some of these mini pine cones that I believe are from Dollar Tree. They were in my craft stash, but I'm almost certain that Dollar Tree has the mini pine cones. And then I'm using some of these yellow florals, and I believe these ones are from Hobby Lobby. I just cut them down really short and then attached them behind my leaf, and then to hold it into place I ended up adding a little bit more Spanish moss just so that it sits up a little bit, and then I use one of these little acorns right in the center in between 2 pine cones. And this is what the pumpkin looks like all finished. I love how this turned out. It fits perfect with my fall decor. You could do this pumpkin in so many different styles and different colors to make it fit with your own home decor. Before we get into the third project today, I do want to let you guys know that I am teaming up with 3 of my DIY friends here on YouTube today for a fall video hop and playlist. The playlist will be linked down in my description box. We are all doing fall DIYs to get you in the spirit for fall and give you lots of inspiration. For today's hop, I am going to be linking my good friend Mia from Make It With Mia. She has so many great affordable, really creative DIYs on her channel. You guys will not be disappointed when you go check her out. Again, her link is down in my description box, so when you're done watching my video, make sure that you hop on over to her video to check out her fall DIYs. Now getting back into today's projects for DIY number 3. For this one, I'm using this bead wreath form from Hobby Lobby, and I'm also going to be using these fall eucalyptus stems from Hobby Lobby, and then these other fall stems from Hobby Lobby. This one usually has a white pumpkin attached to this piece, but I've already used the pumpkin on another project. The first thing I'm doing is starting with the eucalyptus stems. I'm using some pliers to cut 2 pieces off of the stems. Then I'm going to be using 1 on each side of the wreath. And then for the other fall stems, I'm just cutting off the raffia parts, and then I'm also going to be cutting off the little white berries that are on this piece as well. Then I'm taking the raffia and I'm using some hot glue to attach it to the bottom beads of the wreath form. And then I'm taking one of the eucalyptus stems and I'm going to be hot gluing that right over top of the raffia stem. But to hold it into place, I ended up taking a piece of jute and then just wrapping it around a couple times and tying it off so that those pieces would stay in place until the glue fully set. Then I did the exact same thing to the other side, just going in the opposite direction. I first hot glued the raffia stem down to the beads first, then the eucalyptus stem over top of the raffia, and then I took that piece of jute, wrapped it around the stems and the beads, and just tied that off to hold them into place until the glue fully set. Then I'm cutting off some of these white berries that were on the fall stems from Hobby Lobby. I'm cutting off 2 of them, one for each side of the bottom of my wreath. Then I'm also going to be using one of these pumpkins. These did come from the floral section at Hobby Lobby, but I ended up just using one of them for this project, and then I just cut the stem of it off. I'm also using this fall stem. This is also from Hobby Lobby. You can pick this one up in the fall picks at Hobby Lobby. I'm using 2 of them. I'm hot gluing this piece right over top of the raffia and the eucalyptus stem, just holding that into place until the glue sets. And of course, I did the exact same thing to the other side. Now I'm finally attaching those white berries that I cut off just a little while ago, and I'm hot gluing those right next to the fall stems that I just previously attached. Next, I'm attaching my pumpkin. I'm placing hot glue on the bottom of my pumpkin and then placing it in between all of the fall stems that I've attached to my wreath. Again, holding that into place until the glue is fully dry. I'm then adding some of these mini pine cones from Dollar Tree around my pumpkin. I'm now attaching some Spanish moss around both sides of my pumpkin. Once I have the moss all added, I did go back through and add a few more of the mini pine cones around the Spanish moss. And instead of having my wreath where all of the florals are on the bottom, I really like the look where all of the florals are going to be on the left side. So I just shaped my florals a little bit so that they would go around the side of the wreath. This is what it looks like all finished. I think it is absolutely beautiful. I love all of these colors together. And what's even better is this wreath only took me a few minutes to create. Next is a DIY number 4. For this one, I'm going to be using 2 scrap pieces of wood. These ones are 14 inches by 3.5 inches. And the first thing I'm doing to these ones is painting both of them with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. I did 2 coats of paint on both pieces of wood. Then I'm going to be using 4 pieces of trim. This trim I did pick up from Lowe's and I've already cut it down. The longer pieces are 14 by 1/2 of an inch, and then the shorter pieces are 6 inches by 1/2 of an inch. I'm taking my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut and I'm painting this color on the trim in sections, and then once I would have the tint all painted on, I would use an old rag to wipe away the excess, and I did this on all 4 pieces of my trim. To hold the 2 pieces of wood together that I've painted in the plaster color, I am going to be using 4 popsicle sticks from Dollar Tree. I used hot glue on the popsicle sticks and then just attached those in between the 2 wood pieces. Again, I used 4 of them, and this is just making sure that my 2 plaster color pieces are going to stay together. Next, I'm using the trim pieces that I've stained, and I'm just going to be framing my wood pieces that I've painted in the plaster color. I'm placing the trim exactly where I want it to be so that it's all set before I start attaching it. To attach it, I am using hot glue. I just lifted up the pieces a little bit, placed the hot glue on the back side, and then just pressed the trim back down into place. And I did that for all 4 of my trim pieces. For this project, I'm going to be using these unfinished wood letters. These ones are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm spelling out the word hello. For the paint color that I'm using, it's in the color Pueblo, again from Folk Art, and it is the matte acrylic paint. I did all of the letters this color. And then I'm also going to be using this pumpkin wood word cutout. This one is from Michaels. It comes in a pack that says Hello Pumpkin, but I am only going to be using the pumpkin lettering from the pack because I really didn't care for the hello word. So once I have them all painted and the paint is dry, I am just going to be spacing them out the way I want all of my letters and my words to be. And then I'm going to be using hot glue on the back side to attach them. You will notice here in just a second, I didn't have my pumpkin word placed exactly where I wanted it to be, and the glue set too quickly, and I ended up breaking my middle P. But I just painted over it a little bit, hoping that you won't be able to notice it too much, but it ended up looking okay. But just be careful not to break your letters like I did. Once I had the pumpkin word all on, I did go back through and use hot glue on the back side of all of my wood letters to spell out the word hello. Then for the last step, I am going to be using this orange and cream color checked ribbon from Hobby Lobby with 2 pieces of jute. I cut them down to the size that I'm going to want my hanger to be for my sign, and then I just used a staple gun to attach the jute and the ribbon to the back side of my sign. And this is what the Hello Pumpkin sign looks like all finished. This one to me looks like you could go and purchase this in a retail store, minus the broken P. But I really love how this one turned out, and it only took me a little bit to create it, and it was really inexpensive. Now moving into DIY number 5. This is the last DIY in today's video, and I'm starting with this sunflower paper. This is from Hobby Lobby, and I'm also using this house cutout. This one is from Dollar Tree, and I'm taking my paper and placing it over the front of my house, and I just started to sketch out where I'm going to need to cut my paper out. But once I started sketching it out, I realized I could just press down a little bit on the paper and it would make a little crease, and then I would be able to just use that as a guide when I'm cutting the paper. So here I'm just cutting the house shape on my paper, and then once I have that all cut out, I'm using some Mod Podge, and I'm just using a paintbrush to paint that Mod Podge on the back side of the paper, and then I'm placing it on the inside of my house dry erase board, and then just pressing that paper down and getting out any little creases and bubbles that are underneath. Next, I'm painting the frame of my house with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. I probably should have done this part before I added the paper on the inside of the dry erase, but I didn't, so I just had to be very careful when painting around the inside of the frame. And then I'm taking this little square wood cutout. This one was a wood plank from Dollar Tree, and I ended up just cutting it to the size that is 3 inches by 3 inches. And then I painted it with the Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. I'm also using this Fall Sweet Fall mini stencil from Amazon, and I will have the link to it down in the description box. I got the stencil all centered on my little piece of wood, and then I used painter's tape around the edges to hold the stencil into place so that it wouldn't move around once I start painting. For the paint color, I'm using my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Java, and I painted the entire words and leaves in this color. Then once the paint was all dry, I'm removing the painter's tape and the stencil from my wood piece. And this is what it looks like all painted. Now I'm moving on, and I'm using some of this wood bead trim. This I did pick up from Hobby Lobby, and I always like to get this when it's 50% off. What I'm doing now is just taking the wood beads, and I'm just stringing them along the very top roof of the house just to see how much I need before I cut the beads. And then I'm just going to be removing a few of them so I have a little bit of that string hanging out so I can tie a knot just to make sure that the beads stay all together. And then I'm using some of that wood tint in the color Walnut that I had left over on my rag from previous projects. And I'm just wiping that on the beads to give them a little bit more of a darker color. Then I'm going to be attaching the beads to the very top roof frame, and I'm using some hot glue to attach them. And I just made sure that they were really tight as I was hot gluing them down. And then I'm going to be having them go along the roof frame, and then like where the frame of the house would meet the bottom of the house, I just had that strung across, and it, like I did with the rest, I just hot glued it to make sure that it stayed in place. Then I attached the 3x3 that I used my stencil on and just placed it at the bottom portion in the center of my house shape. And then to go around my 3x3 piece, I used some jute, and I just used some hot glue to attach the jute around all 4 sides. Another piece I'm going to be using for this project is this mini raffia bow. This did come in a pack in the fall section at Hobby Lobby this year. And then I'm using some of these little sunflowers. These ones I believe are from Dollar Tree last year. And I'm taking one of the sunflowers, I cut the stem off, and then I'm just hot gluing that right over the bead that was on the raffia bow. And then I'm hot gluing that right in the center of the beads at the top of my house. And then I added 2 more of those sunflowers on each side of my house. And this is what my piece looks like all finished. Another really easy project, and I just love this yellow color for fall. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you are here from the Hop or the playlist, welcome. I'm so happy that you're here, and I hope that you will consider subscribing for all new videos. I would love to hear in the comments down below which project from today's video was your favorite, and don't forget to go check out Mia and the rest of the girls in today's playlist. Thank you so much for watching.